Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the English Globe. We're truly happy to have you with us today. No matter where you are listening from, maybe you are relaxing at home, traveling, or practicing your English in a quiet corner, thank you for spending your valuable time with us. On this channel, we talk about global issues, world history, and international relations using clear, calm, and simple English, so that learning English feels natural and meaningful. I'm Adam, your host, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Julia.
Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you today. Our topic is both exciting and important, especially for understanding today's world. In this episode, we will explore a big question. China, India, or Russia? Who is Asia's true superpower in 2025? This question is not easy, and there is no simple answer, but that's exactly why it is perfect for discussion and learning. As you listen, remember that you are not only learning about world affairs, but also improving your English listening, vocabulary, and thinking skills.
That's right, Julia. Before we compare countries, we must first understand one very important idea. What does the word superpower really mean in 2025? Many people think a superpower is only a country with a strong military, but in today's world, power is much more complex. A superpower is a country that can influence global decisions, shape international systems, and affect the lives of people far beyond its own borders, often without using force or conflict.
So, Adam, if I say this in easier English for our listeners, a superpower is not just a country that can fight wars, but a country that can guide, lead, and influence the world in different ways, such as through business, technology, culture, or diplomacy, which makes the idea of power much wider than before.
Exactly, Julia. Influence is one of the most important words to understand here. Influence means the ability to affect how other countries think, act, or make decisions, not by force, but through example, cooperation, and connection. In 2025, countries that influence global trade rules, technology standards, education systems, and cultural trends often have more lasting power than countries that rely only on military strength.
That's a very helpful explanation, Adam. For English learners, we can think of influence like this. If many people listen to your ideas, respect your choices, and follow your example, then you have influence. On the global level, when many countries want to trade with you, learn from you, or work with you, that country is considered powerful, even if it does not use force.
Another key part of understanding a superpower in 2025 is learning about different types of power. First, there is military power, which is about defense, security, and protection. Second, there is economic power, which includes trade, industry, money, and production. Third, there is technological power, which means leadership in innovation, digital systems, and scientific development. Finally, there is soft power, which includes culture, education, values, and global image.
So, Adam, if I understand correctly, a modern superpower usually needs a balance of all these forms of power, because being strong in only one area may not be enough in a world where countries are closely connected through trade, technology, and communication.
That's absolutely correct, Julia. In 2025, the world is highly interconnected, which means countries depend on each other more than ever before. Economic power allows countries to invest and build partnerships. Technological power helps them lead the future. Soft power helps them gain trust and respect, and military power protects their interests. A true superpower is often strong in several of these areas at the same time.
If I explain this simply for our listeners, power today is not loud or aggressive. It is often quiet and strategic. A country can shape the world by building technology that everyone uses, by producing goods that everyone needs, or by spreading culture that people enjoy, and this kind of power can be more effective than force.
Now, this brings us to an important question. Why is Asia becoming more important globally in 2025? The answer lies in population growth, economic expansion, technological innovation, and regional cooperation. Asia is home to some of the world's largest economies, fastest-growing markets, and most dynamic societies, which means decisions made in Asia increasingly affect the entire world.
Yes, and for English learners, this is very important to understand. Asia is no longer just a region that follows global trends. It is a region that creates them. From technology and manufacturing to education and culture, Asian countries are shaping the future, which is why understanding Asia helps us understand the modern world.
Exactly, Julia. That is why comparing China, India, and Russia is not about choosing winners or taking sides, but about understanding different paths to power and influence. Each country has a unique global role, different strengths, and different challenges, and learning about them helps us see how power works in the real world.
And this is also what makes today's topic so useful for English learning. You will hear comparison language, abstract ideas, and clear explanations, which are very helpful for improving listening skills. Try to focus on keywords like power, influence, leadership, global role, and cooperation as we continue.
Well said, Julia. So, dear listeners, as we move forward, keep this idea in your mind. A superpower in 2025 is not defined by one single factor, but by a combination of influence, connection, and leadership. In the next part of our podcast, we will begin our deeper journey by looking at Asia's changing position in the global system and why this shift matters so much today. To understand why Asia is so important in today's world, we need to take a step back and look at how global power has changed over time, because for many decades, especially after World War II, global economics and politics were largely shaped by Western countries, particularly the United States and parts of Europe, which had strong economies, advanced industries, and major influence over international institutions, trade systems, and political decisions around the world.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, for a long time the world mostly followed Western leadership, meaning that many important global rules, economic systems, and political ideas came from Western countries, and other regions often adjusted themselves to fit into that system.
Yes, that is exactly right, Julia. But as we moved into the 21st century, several important changes began to happen at the same time, such as rapid economic growth in Asia, improvements in education and technology, and deeper regional cooperation, which slowly shifted the center of global activity away from only the West and toward a more balanced global system, where multiple regions now play leading roles.
This is where we often hear the word multipolar, which might sound difficult for English learners, but it is actually a very useful word, because it simply means a world where power is not controlled by one single country or one single group of countries, but instead shared among many powerful nations across different regions.
Exactly, Julia. A multipolar world means that global influence is spread across several centers of power, and Asia has become one of the most important of these centers because it includes large populations, fast-growing economies, major manufacturing hubs, and increasing political influence, which together make Asia central to global decision-making in 2025.
If we connect this idea to real life, Adam, we can see Asia's importance in everyday things, such as the smartphones people use, the clothes they wear, the technology inside their cars, and even the online services they depend on, because many of these products and systems are designed, produced, or managed by Asian countries.
That is a very good point, Julia, because economic power is often invisible in daily life, but it shapes global reality in deep ways, and Asia's role in global supply chains, trade networks, and investment flows means that economic changes in Asia can affect prices, jobs, and growth in almost every part of the world.
So, for English learners, understanding Asia's economic position helps explain why news from this region matters so much, because when Asia grows faster or slower, the effects are felt globally, which makes learning about Asia not just interesting, but also practical and relevant.
Alongside economics, Asia's political role has also expanded significantly, because many Asian countries now play active roles in international organizations, regional partnerships, and global negotiations, which means they help shape discussions about trade rules, climate cooperation, security arrangements, and technological standards.
And this shows us that power today is not only about controlling land or armies, but also about being present at global tables where decisions are made, because countries that participate actively in these discussions can protect their interests and influence global outcomes in peaceful and strategic ways.
Now, this changing global position of Asia also explains why China, India, and Russia are so often compared, because each of these countries represents a different model of power within Asia, and each plays a unique role in shaping regional and global dynamics, even though their histories, systems, and priorities are quite different.
If I explain this simply, Adam, these three countries are often compared because they are large, influential, and active beyond their borders, which means their decisions matter not only at home, but also for neighboring countries and the wider international community.
That is correct, Julia. China is often discussed because of its economic scale and global trade connections. India is highlighted because of its population size, democratic system, and rapid growth potential. And Russia is included because of its strategic reach, energy resources, and long-standing role in global security, especially across Eurasia.
So even though these countries are very different, they are often placed in the same conversation because they all influence Asia's direction and the global balance of power, which makes comparisons useful for understanding how the world is changing.
Exactly. And it is important to remember that comparison does not always mean competition, because sometimes countries influence the world in parallel ways, sometimes they cooperate, and sometimes they simply represent different paths to power, all of which are valuable for learners to understand when following global news.
For English learners, this section is also very helpful because it uses cause and effect language, such as because, as a result, and which means. And listening carefully to these structures can improve both understanding and speaking ability over time.
Well said, Julia. So, as we continue this discussion, keep in mind that Asia's growing importance is not sudden or accidental, but the result of long-term economic growth, political engagement, and global integration, which together explain why Asia now stands at the center of global economics and politics in 2025.
And that is why learning about global power is not just for politicians or experts, but also for English learners. Because understanding how the world works gives context to language, helps build confidence, and allows you to participate more actively in global conversations.
In the next part of our podcast, we will begin focusing more closely on one country at a time, starting with China, to understand how its economic strength and global connections shape its position as one of Asia's most influential powers today. When we talk about China's power profile in 2025, it is important to begin with its economic strength, because China has built one of the largest and most deeply connected economies in the world, an economy that influences global markets, supply chains, investment flows, and consumer behavior across continents, which means that economic changes inside China often create strong effects far beyond its borders, affecting businesses, governments, and everyday people in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, China is powerful mainly because its economy is very big and very connected, and when a country produces, buys, and sells so much with the rest of the world, it naturally becomes important, because many other countries depend on it for jobs, trade, and economic stability.
Exactly, Julia. And one major reason for this economic influence is China's role as a global manufacturing center. Because for decades, China has invested heavily in factories, skilled labor, transportation systems, and industrial efficiency, which has allowed it to produce a wide range of goods at large scale, from everyday household products to advanced electronics, making it a central part of global production networks that many countries rely on.
In other words, Adam, when people around the world buy phones, machines, tools, or even simple daily items, there is a very high chance that some part of those products was made in China, which shows how manufacturing power quietly connects China to the daily lives of billions of people.
Alongside manufacturing, China's trade power is also extremely important in 2025 because China is one of the largest trading partners for dozens of countries, meaning it buys raw materials, energy, and food from many regions and sells finished goods and technology in return, creating long-term economic relationships that strengthen its global role and increase its influence within international trade systems.
This matters globally, Adam, because when countries trade a lot with China, they often pay close attention to China's economic health, policies, and growth trends, since a slowdown or change in China can directly affect their own economies, jobs, and development plans.
Another key part of China's power profile is technology, because in recent years, China has invested heavily in research, digital infrastructure, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing, which has helped it move from being only a production center to becoming an important innovator, shaping how future technologies are developed, applied, and distributed across global markets.
So, if I put this simply for English learners, China is no longer only a country that makes things designed by others, but also a country that designs its own technology, builds its own digital systems, and competes in areas that will define the future, such as clean energy, smart cities, and digital services.
Infrastructure is another major strength that supports China's economic and technological power, because China has developed large-scale transportation networks, modern ports, high-speed rail systems, and advanced logistics capabilities, which not only improve efficiency inside the country, but also help connect China more closely with neighboring regions and global markets.
This is important globally, Adam, because strong infrastructure makes trade faster and cheaper. And when a country can move goods, people, and information efficiently, it becomes more attractive as a partner, which increases its economic influence without the need for pressure or force.
Beyond economics and technology, China's diplomacy and global partnerships also play a significant role in its power profile, because China actively participates in international organizations, regional forums, and bilateral partnerships, using dialogue, investment, and cooperation to build long-term relationships that support stability, development, and mutual economic benefit.
Why does this matter globally, Adam? Especially for learners who may feel far away from these big international discussions. And how should they think about diplomacy in simple terms?
It matters globally because diplomacy helps countries solve problems peacefully, coordinate economic activity, and manage shared challenges like development and climate concerns. And when a country like China builds many partnerships, it increases its ability to shape conversations and contribute to global solutions, which is another form of influence that does not depend on military power.
So, for English learners, the key idea is that China's power in 2025 comes from many connected areas: a large economy, strong manufacturing, wide trade networks, growing technology, modern infrastructure, and active diplomacy. And understanding these ideas helps explain why China is often discussed as one of Asia's most influential countries today.
That is a great summary, Julia. And as we move forward, listeners should remember that power in the modern world is rarely about one single strength, but about how different strengths work together over time to shape a country's global role, which we will continue to explore as we compare China with other major Asian powers in the next sections. While China's economic growth over the past several decades has been remarkable and has transformed the country into one of the most important actors in the global system, It is also important to understand that in 2025, China, like every major economy, faces a number of limitations and challenges because long-term growth naturally becomes more complex as an economy becomes larger, more mature, and more deeply connected to global markets, which creates new pressures that did not exist during earlier periods of rapid expansion.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, even very strong countries face difficulties, and when an economy grows very fast for a long time, it eventually slows down, not because it is failing, but because managing a large and complex system requires balance, adjustment, and careful planning.
Exactly, Julia. And one of the most discussed challenges in China today is concern about economic slowdown. Because although China continues to grow and innovate, its growth rate is lower than in the past, which means the country must shift from a model based mainly on large-scale manufacturing and investment to one that focuses more on services, consumption, and higher-value innovation, a transition that takes time and requires structural change.
In other words, Adam, China is moving from fast growth to more stable and sustainable growth, and while this change is normal for a large economy, it can create short-term uncertainty for businesses, workers, and international partners who are used to seeing very high growth numbers year after year.
Another important challenge relates to demographics, because China's population structure is changing as birth rates decline and the population ages, which means there will be fewer young workers supporting a larger elderly population, and although this trend is also happening in many other countries, it presents long-term questions about labor supply, productivity, and social support systems that China must carefully manage in the coming decades.
So, Adam, if I say this simply for English learners, demographics is about the age and size of a population, and when there are fewer young people and more older people, a country must think carefully about jobs, healthcare, and economic planning, because these changes affect growth and stability over time.
Alongside economic and demographic factors, China also faces challenges related to global trust and international perception, because while many countries value economic cooperation with China, there are also concerns in some parts of the world about transparency, long-term intentions, and strategic influence, which means that building trust requires consistent communication, openness, and cooperation over time.
This is a very important point, Adam, because global influence is not only about what a country produces or builds, but also about how other countries feel when they work with it. And trust plays a big role in determining whether partnerships grow stronger or become more cautious.
Exactly, Julia. And this is where contrast words become very useful for understanding China's situation in 2025. Because while China has strong economic capabilities and advanced infrastructure, it also needs to manage perception challenges. Although it plays a major role in global trade, it must continue to strengthen confidence among partners. However, maintaining influence in a connected world depends not only on strength, but also on credibility and mutual understanding.
For English learners, this shows that power is never one-dimensional, because a country can be strong in some areas while facing limitations in others. And understanding both sides helps listeners develop a more balanced and realistic view of global affairs rather than a simple or emotional one.
That is a very thoughtful observation, Julia, and it reminds us that discussing challenges does not mean criticism, but instead helps us understand how global powers adapt, adjust, and respond to changing conditions. Because long-term leadership in the modern world depends on the ability to manage weaknesses as carefully as strengths.
So, dear listeners, as you think about China's role in 2025, remember that strength and challenge exist together. And while China remains a major global actor, its future influence will depend on how successfully it balances economic adjustment, demographic change, and international trust, which is a lesson that applies to all countries, not just China.
In the next section, we will shift our focus to another important country in Asia, India, and explore how its growing population, expanding economy, and global partnerships are shaping its rise on the world stage, offering a different path to power in the same rapidly changing region. When experts and analysts describe India as a future superpower, they are usually thinking in long-term terms rather than immediate dominance, because India's greatest strengths are developing steadily over time, especially its population advantage, economic expansion, and growing role in technology and diplomacy, which together create a foundation that could support much greater global influence in the coming decades rather than overnight change.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, India is often called a rising power because it is still growing, still building, and still shaping its role in the world, and many people believe that its importance will increase step by step in the future, rather than appearing suddenly all at once.
One of India's most discussed advantages is its population, because India has one of the largest and youngest populations in the world, which means it has a large workforce, strong human potential, and a wide base of consumers. And if this population is supported by education, skills training, and employment opportunities, it can drive long-term economic growth and innovation for many years ahead.
In easy English, Adam, a young population means more people who can work, learn new skills, start businesses, and create ideas. And this gives a country energy and possibility, especially when compared to countries that are facing population aging or labor shortages.
India's economic growth also plays a key role in its rising status, because over recent years, India has shown steady expansion in areas such as manufacturing, services, infrastructure, and domestic consumption. And while its economy is still developing in many ways, its size, diversity, and resilience make it an increasingly important participant in regional and global economic systems.
So, for English learners, this means that India's economy is not just growing in one direction, but in many directions at the same time, which creates opportunities for jobs, investment, and international cooperation, and helps explain why global companies and governments are paying closer attention to India's future.
Technology and services are especially important in understanding India's long-term potential, because India has become a global leader in areas such as information technology, software development, digital services, and remote business solutions, which allows it to connect with the world through knowledge and skills rather than only through physical goods or natural resources.
In simpler words, Adam, India sells ideas, skills, and digital services to the world. And this kind of economic activity is very valuable in the modern global economy because it depends on education, creativity, and communication rather than factories alone.
Alongside technology, India's role in global diplomacy has also expanded, because India actively engages with many countries and international organizations, balancing relationships across different regions and participating in discussions on trade, development, climate cooperation, and regional stability, which helps strengthen its global voice and international credibility over time.
Why does this matter globally, Adam, especially for listeners who are learning English and trying to understand why India's name appears more often in international news and global discussions?
It matters because diplomacy helps countries build trust, manage differences, and create opportunities for cooperation. And as India increases its diplomatic engagement, it becomes more visible and influential on the world stage, which supports its image as a responsible and growing global partner rather than just a regional actor.
So, for English learners, the main idea is that India's rise is about future potential because its young population, expanding economy, strong technology sector, and active diplomacy together create opportunities for development and influence that are likely to grow stronger over time.
That is a very good summary, Julia. And as we continue this discussion, listeners should remember that becoming a superpower is a long process, not a single moment. And India's path shows how growth, opportunity, and development can gradually shape a country's role in the global system, which we will explore further as we compare India's strengths and challenges in the next section. While India's long-term potential as a rising global power is widely discussed and often viewed with optimism, it is equally important to understand that rapid growth and development naturally come with serious challenges, because when a country is large, diverse, and still in the process of modernization, progress does not happen evenly across all regions or social groups, which means strengths and difficulties exist side by side at the same time.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simple English for our listeners, India is growing and improving in many areas, but it is also facing problems that need time, planning, and careful solutions, and understanding both sides helps us think clearly instead of emotionally when we hear news about the country.
One of the most discussed challenges is infrastructure, because although India has made major investments in roads, railways, airports, digital networks, and energy systems, there are still significant gaps between urban and rural areas, and in many regions transportation, housing, and public services have not yet developed at the same pace as economic activity, which can slow productivity and limit opportunity.
In easier English, Adam, infrastructure means the basic systems that help a country work smoothly, like roads, electricity, water, and internet. And when these systems are not strong everywhere, people and businesses cannot move, connect, or grow as easily as they should.
Another major challenge is income inequality, because while India's economy has created wealth, jobs, and a growing middle class, the benefits of growth have not reached all citizens equally, which means some people enjoy modern lifestyles and global opportunities, while others still struggle with low income, limited education, and restricted access to health care, creating social and economic imbalance.
This is an important point for learners, Adam, because inequality does not mean that a country is failing, but it does mean that growth must be managed carefully, so that development creates solutions for more people instead of advantages for only a small group.
Regional security pressures also play a role in shaping India's challenges, because India exists in a complex neighborhood with historical tensions, border concerns, and regional competition, which requires continuous attention to security, diplomacy, and stability, sometimes limiting the resources and focus that could otherwise be used purely for economic development.
So, Adam, in simple terms, this means that India must spend time and energy protecting its borders and managing regional relationships, which is necessary for safety, but also adds pressure to its long-term development goals.
When we look at these challenges together, we can use a problem-solution way of thinking, because infrastructure gaps require long-term investment and planning, income inequality requires education, job creation, and inclusive policies, and security pressures require diplomacy, dialogue, and regional cooperation, showing that challenges are not permanent obstacles, but issues that can be addressed over time.
For English learners, this is a great example of analytical thinking, because instead of reacting emotionally to headlines, we look at problems calmly, understand their causes, and think about possible solutions, which is exactly how global issues should be discussed in a thoughtful and respectful way.
Exactly, Julia. And this balanced approach helps us understand that India's rise as a future power does not depend on ignoring its challenges, but on how effectively it manages them, because long-term influence is built not only through growth, but also through stability, fairness, and resilience in difficult situations.
So, dear listeners, as you think about India's challenges, remember that development is a journey, not a straight line, and learning to analyze problems carefully will not only improve your understanding of global affairs, but also strengthen your English skills by using clear, formal, and logical language.
In the next section, we will turn our attention to Russia and explore how its strategic influence, energy resources, and geopolitical role shape its position as a major power in Asia, offering yet another different model of strength and limitation in today's multipolar world. When we examine Russia's role in Asia in 2025, it is important to recognize that its influence comes from a combination of military strength, abundant energy resources, and a carefully managed geopolitical position, which allows the country to play a significant role in regional and global affairs, even though its economy is smaller than those of China or India. Russia's long history as a major world power, its strategic location bridging Europe and Asia, and its ability to maintain relationships with multiple partners simultaneously give it a unique type of influence that differs from economic dominance.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, Russia is important not because it has the largest economy, but because it has a strong army, lots of energy like oil and gas, and a strategic position on the map, which gives it power to influence other countries and international decisions in ways that do not rely only on money.
Exactly, Julia. One of the most obvious elements of Russia's power is its military, because Russia maintains one of the largest armed forces in the world, with advanced technology, nuclear capabilities, and well-trained personnel, which allows it to participate actively in security arrangements, border protection, and international military discussions. This military presence not only ensures national defense, but also contributes to Russia's ability to engage in diplomacy from a position of strength, meaning that other countries often consider Russia's interests when making regional or global decisions.
In simpler terms, Adam, having a strong military gives Russia a voice at international tables, because countries tend to take its positions seriously when discussing security, alliances, and conflicts, which is an important form of power that is different from economic or technological influence.
Energy resources are another major pillar of Russia's strategic influence, because the country possesses vast reserves of oil, natural gas, and other minerals, which it exports to Asia, Europe, and beyond. These resources make Russia a critical partner for energy-dependent countries because access to reliable energy is essential for economic growth, industrial development, and national security. Through pipelines, contracts, and investment in energy projects, Russia has built long-term relationships that enhance its geopolitical leverage.
So, Adam, if I explain this for English learners, energy is not just about selling oil or gas. It is about creating relationships, agreements, and trust, because many countries depend on Russian energy to keep their industries running and homes heated, which gives Russia influence even without using force.
Another important aspect of Russia's power is its geopolitical role, because Russia occupies a strategic position that connects Europe and Asia, giving it influence over major trade routes, security zones, and regional partnerships. Its participation in organizations such as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and regional security dialogues allows Russia to negotiate with multiple countries simultaneously and to act as a bridge or counterbalance in a multipolar world.
In simple English, Adam, Russia's location on the map makes it important for many countries because it can help or influence trade, energy, and security between Asia and Europe, which is why even smaller countries watch Russia's decisions closely.
It is also worth noting that Russia's power is not only about control or domination, but about the ability to shape outcomes, create options, and maintain strategic partnerships, which is why experts sometimes describe its influence as subtle and long-term rather than immediate and dramatic. Russia often focuses on careful planning, negotiation, and the projection of stability, which allows it to maintain a strong presence in regional discussions without needing to rely solely on economic power or rapid growth.
For English learners, this is a good example of abstract thinking, Adam, because influence can be seen in many ways. It is not always money, it is not always speed, and it is not always force. Sometimes power comes from position, resources, planning, and the ability to be part of many conversations at the same time.
Exactly, Julia. And when we compare Russia to China and India, we see that power in Asia is multidimensional. China leads through economy and technology, India is rising through population and innovation, and Russia influences through military strength, energy, and strategic geography. Each model demonstrates that global power is complex and depends on different factors that work together to shape a country's role.
So, for learners, the key point is that power can take many forms, and understanding these differences helps us see why international relations are often subtle and nuanced rather than simple competitions. Vocabulary like strategy, influence, leverage, resources, and geopolitical are very useful for discussing these ideas clearly in English.
In the next section, we will discuss the challenges that Russia faces in maintaining its influence, including economic limitations, demographic issues, and international perception, because understanding a country's strengths alongside its challenges gives a balanced and realistic picture of global power in Asia today. While Russia maintains significant influence through its military strength, energy resources, and strategic geographic position, it is important to recognize that in 2025, the country also faces several constraints that affect its long-term global role, because no nation, regardless of its power, can operate without limitations, and understanding these challenges helps create a complete picture of international dynamics, rather than a one-sided view focused only on strengths or achievements.
So, Adam, if I explain this in simpler English for our listeners, Russia is strong in many ways, but it also has problems that can slow down or limit its influence, and learning about these problems helps us understand global affairs more clearly and realistically.
One major constraint is economic limitations, because although Russia possesses valuable natural resources and generates significant revenue from energy exports, its overall economy is relatively small compared to China, India, or the United States, and it is heavily dependent on a few sectors, which makes it vulnerable to price fluctuations, global market changes, and technological shifts that can impact growth, innovation, and long-term stability.
In simpler terms, Adam, this means that while Russia makes a lot of money from oil, gas, and minerals, it does not have as much diversity in its economy, which can create risks if global energy prices fall or demand changes, and this can affect Russia's ability to fund projects, invest in technology, or compete internationally.
Another important challenge comes from international isolation effects, because in recent years, some countries have responded to Russia's actions with sanctions, trade restrictions, and reduced cooperation, which limits access to advanced technology, global investment, and certain markets. While Russia continues to maintain strategic partnerships with key countries, these limitations can slow modernization, reduce economic efficiency, and create additional costs for long-term projects.
So, Adam, for English learners, this shows that international isolation does not mean a country disappears from the world, but it does make some things harder, like buying advanced machines, trading freely, or cooperating on global technology, which is why countries try to balance independence with partnership carefully.
Long-term sustainability is another area of concern, because Russia's population is aging and its workforce is relatively smaller compared to China and India, which affects labor supply, productivity, and domestic consumption. And although the government has policies to encourage growth and innovation, demographic pressures combined with economic constraints can influence how effectively Russia maintains its influence over the next decades.
If I explain this simply, Adam, a smaller or aging population means fewer workers and innovators, which can slow economic development and make it harder to support large-scale infrastructure, education, or social programs. And this affects the country's overall ability to stay competitive.
When we compare Russia's constraints to the strengths of China and India, we can see interesting contrasts. Because while China faces slowing growth and demographic challenges, its economy and global trade reach remain enormous, and India is gaining population and technological advantages, whereas Russia relies heavily on energy and military power, which shows that different countries face different limitations even while remaining influential, highlighting the complexity of global power.
For learners, this is a very useful point, Adam, because it shows that power is not static, and that countries rise, change, or face limitations over time, which is why careful evaluation and comparison are better than simple judgments or assumptions based on headlines.
Exactly, Julia. Using comparison and evaluation language, we can say that Russia is strong in strategic areas, although it is smaller economically. It has influence through resources and military power, while at the same time facing long-term challenges that require careful planning. And it continues to play an important role in Asia, but its future influence depends on how it addresses economic, demographic, and international pressures.
So, dear listeners, as you consider Russia's position, remember that global power is a dynamic concept. It is shaped by strengths and constraints, opportunities and challenges, and by the decisions countries make over time. For English learners, this section also provides examples of formal, analytical language, comparison words like although, while, however, and evaluation phrases such as it depends on or requires careful planning, which are useful for academic and professional English.
In the next section, we will bring together the discussion of China, India, and Russia to compare their overall power profiles in 2025, highlighting strengths, limitations, and influence strategies, so that listeners can understand the complex and interconnected nature of Asian superpower dynamics in 2025, a balanced and clear way. In this section, we are going to take a detailed side-by-side look at 3 of Asia's most discussed powers in 2025: China, India, and Russia. We have already explored each country individually, looking at their strengths and limitations, and now it is time to compare them directly across several critical dimensions, such as economy, military, technology, and soft power. The goal is not to declare a winner, but to provide a clear understanding of how these countries differ, what makes them influential, and why no single country dominates every area of global power, which is a key idea for understanding modern multipolar Asia.
Yes, Adam, and for our English learners, this section is a great opportunity to practice comparative adjectives and structured thinking, because we will say things like larger than, more advanced, less diversified, and stronger in some areas than others, which are very useful when describing countries, companies, or other complex systems in English.
Let's start with the economy. China has the largest economy of the 3 in terms of total GDP, which means it produces more goods and services overall than either India or Russia. Its manufacturing sector is enormous, its export networks reach almost every part of the world, and its trade connections make it a key player in global supply chains. India, while growing rapidly, has a smaller total GDP, but it is expected to grow faster than China over the next few decades due to its large young population, expanding middle class, and increasing technological output. Russia's economy, by contrast, is smaller than both China and India, and is heavily dependent on energy exports, which makes it less diversified and more vulnerable to fluctuations in global markets.
In simpler English, Adam, this means that China makes and sells the most things in total and trades with almost the whole world. India is growing quickly and has many young people to work and innovate. And Russia makes money mostly from oil and gas. So if energy prices change, its economy can be affected more easily.
Next, let's look at military power. Russia is often considered the strongest in terms of direct military capabilities because it has advanced technology, nuclear weapons, and a long history of strategic planning, which gives it influence over security discussions and defense arrangements in Asia and beyond. China's military is also very strong and has been modernizing rapidly over the past 2 decades, focusing on advanced naval capabilities, cyber warfare, and missile systems, which allow it to protect its trade routes, assert influence regionally, and participate in global security conversations. India's military is growing and improving, with modern equipment and a large manpower base, but it is not yet as technologically advanced as China or as strategically powerful as Russia, though it remains highly capable in regional defense and increasingly active in international peacekeeping operations.
In simpler words, Adam, Russia has a very strong military and special weapons. China's army is growing fast and modern. And India's army is big and improving, but still behind in some advanced technologies, so each country has different strengths in defense.
When we move to technology, China is clearly the leader in production, digital infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and high-tech manufacturing. Its investments in research, innovation, and digital connectivity allow it to shape global technology trends and influence international standards. India is emerging as a technology hub, especially in software, digital services, and IT-enabled solutions, which allows it to connect globally through knowledge and innovation, rather than only through manufacturing. Russia, while technologically advanced in military systems and certain scientific sectors, is less dominant in civilian technology markets and digital services compared to China and India, which limits its influence in the global technology sector outside of defense-related innovation.
So, Adam, in easy English, China makes and sells a lot of advanced technology. India is strong in software and digital services, and Russia is good at military and scientific technology, but not as strong in everyday technology that affects people's lives worldwide.
Soft power is another important area to compare, because influence is not only about armies or money, but also about culture, diplomacy, and global perception. China has been increasing its soft power through initiatives like the Belt and Road, cultural exchanges, media outreach, and international investment in infrastructure, which gives it influence in many countries without using force. India has a very strong cultural presence worldwide through Bollywood, yoga, literature, and diaspora communities that act as bridges between nations, which gives it a unique form of influence based on culture and ideas. Russia also projects soft power through media, diplomatic networks, cultural exports, and historical influence, though in some regions its soft power is limited by political tensions and international perceptions.
In simpler terms, Adam, China builds influence by investing in other countries and sharing its culture. India shares its movies, language, and traditions around the world. And Russia also shares culture, but sometimes people do not trust it as much because of politics, so soft power works differently for each country.
When we put all of these dimensions together, we can see why no single country dominates every area. China is the largest economic and technological power, but it faces demographic and geopolitical challenges. India is the fastest-growing economy with cultural and demographic advantages, but it is still developing infrastructure and technological capacity. Russia is a military and energy powerhouse with strategic influence, but it has economic limitations and demographic pressures that restrict its overall reach. Each country is strong in some areas and less strong in others, which is why analysts often describe Asia's power as multidimensional, and why comparisons require nuance and context rather than simple rankings.
For English learners, this comparison also shows how to use analytical language, like stronger in some areas than others, less diversified, more advanced, and growing rapidly, which are useful phrases for talking about differences between countries, companies, or other systems in a professional and structured way.
Exactly, Julia. Understanding that each country has its own combination of strengths and limitations also helps listeners see the modern global system as interconnected and complex, where power is distributed across multiple countries rather than concentrated in one, and where long-term influence depends not only on immediate size or strength, but also on adaptability, innovation, diplomacy, and sustainability.
So, in simple terms, Adam, no country in Asia is the superpower in every way. China is very big and technologically advanced, India is growing fast and has many young people, and Russia is strong in military and energy. Each one has advantages and challenges, and together they create a balance in Asia that affects the whole world.
That's a very clear summary, Julia. And as we conclude this comparison, listeners should remember that analyzing countries side by side helps with critical thinking, English comprehension, and global awareness. Using comparison words, structured descriptions, and clear logic is not only useful for learning English, but also for understanding how the world functions in a balanced, factual, and nuanced way.
Exactly, Adam. And for learners, this section is also an example of how to listen for details. Notice contrast words like however, although, while, compared to, and understand long sentences that explain cause, effect, and comparison, which are key skills for academic and professional English listening.
In the next section, we will bring all of these insights together to reflect on the meaning of Asian power in 2025, discuss lessons for global learners, and explore how understanding these countries can help you think critically and improve English at the same time. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the final section of today's episode on China, India, or Russia. Who is Asia's true superpower in 2025? After exploring each country individually, comparing their strengths and challenges, and analyzing their influence across economy, military, technology, and soft power, it is now time to summarize what we have learned. The most important idea to remember is that the term superpower is not a fixed label. It depends on how we define power. Some people focus on economic size, others on military strength, technological leadership, or cultural influence. When we use the word true superpower, we are really asking, which country has the most influence across the areas that matter in today's world? And the answer, as we have seen, is not simple, because each country has unique strengths and limitations, and each plays a different role in shaping Asia and the wider global system.
Yes, Adam. For our English learners, this is a very useful point. Sometimes we think a superpower must be the biggest or the strongest in every way, but in reality, countries have different types of influence. China is strong economically and technologically. India is rising with population and innovation, and Russia maintains military and energy strength. Understanding that power is multidimensional also helps us practice abstract thinking in English because we learn words like influence, multidimensional, dominance, and strategic.
Exactly, Julia. Another key takeaway is that Asia in 2025 is multipolar. This means that no single country dominates the continent entirely. Instead, multiple countries share influence and interact with each other in complex ways. China, India, and Russia all shape regional and global decisions, but they do so in different ways and through different combinations of strengths. This multipolarity is important to understand because it changes the way international trade, diplomacy, security, and culture function in Asia, and it reminds us that influence is distributed rather than centralized, which makes global affairs more dynamic and nuanced.
In simpler English, Adam, this means that Asia is not controlled by just one country. Each country contributes in its own way. China, India, and Russia all have power, but in different areas. Listening to these explanations also helps learners understand long sentences, comparison words like rather than or instead of, and academic vocabulary used in discussions about international relations.
Another point I want to emphasize is that understanding global power does not mean taking sides. In this podcast, we have analyzed facts, statistics, and trends in a neutral and balanced way. We have looked at both strengths and limitations, opportunities and challenges, for each country. Being informed does not require agreement or judgment, but rather curiosity and careful observation. This is an important skill not only for understanding global affairs, but also for developing critical thinking in English, because it trains listeners to listen to long explanations, follow arguments, and learn vocabulary used in analytical contexts.
Exactly, Adam. For learners, reflecting on both the knowledge and the English we practice today is very valuable. we used long sentences, structured comparisons, abstract nouns, and specialized words like geopolitical, multipolar, influence, leverage, and strategic planning. Repeating these words, writing them down, and trying to use them in your own sentences will improve your English vocabulary and comprehension, especially for academic or professional discussions.
Yes, Julia. Listening to long-form discussions like this one helps learners train their ears for complex sentence structures, linking words, and formal expressions. It also encourages patience and focus, because understanding global affairs in depth takes time, and learning English in this way mirrors that process, step by step, with attention to meaning and context.
Another thing our listeners can take away is the idea of comparing and evaluating information. Today we practiced words and phrases like compared to, although while stronger in some areas than others, and depends on. Using these expressions will help you describe, analyze, and discuss topics in English in a precise and organized way. This is especially helpful for students, professionals, or anyone who wants to improve English for understanding news, international events, or academic topics.
Absolutely, Julia. Finally, the most important lesson is that knowledge and English learning go hand in hand. By following today's discussion, listeners have gained insights into Asia's power dynamics, and at the same time practiced understanding complex English, long sentences, abstract ideas, and comparative structures. This is exactly the goal of the English Globe, to connect language learning with real-world knowledge so that listeners can improve English while becoming informed global citizens.
So, dear listeners, as we conclude this episode, remember these key points. First, superpower depends on how we define it. Second, Asia is multipolar, meaning multiple countries share influence. Third, analyzing strengths and challenges carefully helps us avoid oversimplification. And fourth, listening to structured, long-form English improves your comprehension, vocabulary, and critical thinking.
That's beautifully summarized, Julia. And for our listeners, I encourage you to practice by reviewing today's vocabulary, repeating key phrases, and thinking critically about how power works in different countries. Whether it is economic growth, military strength, technological innovation, or cultural influence, understanding these concepts in English will help you follow news, participate in discussions, and expand your global perspective.
Yes, Adam. And remember, English learning is a journey just like understanding global affairs. It takes patience, attention, and continuous practice. Listening carefully, taking notes, and reflecting on what you hear will gradually build your ability to understand long sentences, abstract concepts, and professional vocabulary.
Thank you very much for joining us today, dear listeners. We hope this episode has helped you understand the complex dynamics of China, India, and Russia in Asia, and at the same time improved your English listening skills and vocabulary. Keep practicing, stay curious about the world, and remember that understanding multiple perspectives is key to both language learning and global awareness.
Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, learned new English words and phrases, and gained insights into the evolving world of Asian superpowers. Remember, learning English is more than grammar and vocabulary. It is also about thinking critically, understanding context, and connecting ideas across the world.
We look forward to bringing you more episodes where language and global knowledge come together. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and stay curious.
Goodbye for now, dear listeners. And remember, every step you take in learning English brings you closer to understanding the world more clearly.